For people to come in here, we just asked, we want to know who's here. You can see we've asked how you can set up your Zoom window. And in the chat, we've got 3 questions. And who are you? What do you do? How would you describe your work? And then we always love to hear a little bit more of the human. What are some interesting things that you've done yesterday, something you love, or something somebody may not know about you, the people you know here. So just so we have a sense. So if you could pop that in the chat. And we're at 3:09. So we're actually just going to jump right in. So if you're able to do that now, that would be wonderful. And we'll do our brief introductions here. Conflict of interest. Nicole and I are conflict free for all of those things there. And so us, I am an assistant professor here in medicine. I teach human-centered design, strategic foresight in the Health Leadership Academy, as well as the new iBiomed program. And Nicole?
As Sarah said, I'm Senior Education Officer at the McMaster Museum of Art, and I co-facilitate the Art of Seeing with Joyce Zazelak. And I've worked with Sean and his class to develop and create artifacts and experiences from the future. And thank you, Sean, for having me here today.
Awesome. And you can see there's a little arrow pointing up to this thing called the McMaster Futures Collective. This was sort of born out of Nicole and I's collaboration. And really, we're beginning sort of a McMaster-wide community that's interested in looking at futures and foresight as it applies to education research, especially within health. So if you want to find out more about the McMaster Futures Collective, please reach out to us. Great. Thanks, Sarah. So what are you going to learn today? All right, let's get into it. Well, we're going to do 2 things. One is we're going to actually get you guys into what's called a futures mindset. And this term mindset is really all about how do we think about things? How do we approach things? Sort of an attitude. It's sometimes kind of hard to pin down. And we're also going to do some methods. So, we're going to pick up a few foresight and futures methods that we think you might find interesting applying to your clinical practice or to your organization. What's our plan? We're going to do a little activity called Expectations of the Future. And then we're going to have a talk a bit around what foresight is, and also this thing called experiential futures. Yes. And then we will play a game. There's no better way to learn than to play a game. So we're going to play a future scenarios game. Then we'll do a bit of a debrief on our way out.
Okay.
How are you going to learn today? We're going to do some reflection. We're going to get you guys to obviously listen to a little bit about what we have to share. And then we're going to get you to work in a small group. So we'll play a game that'll give you a chance to try some things out later. So, this term futures and foresight is a bit of a new one for a lot of people. And futures and strategic foresight has, I think about the writer H.G. Wells. Anybody of you know wrote Time Machine? Maybe read that in high school. It said that we have a lot of people who are employed to think about the past, and we call those people historians. But we also really need people who are what do you call practitioners of foresight. So this term foresight, H.G. Wells was famous for saying. And so futures and strategic foresight is a field that's developed over the past 50 years to really address how do we think more effectively about what might plausibly happen in the future. So not a predictive mode of thinking about things, but really how do we imagine a number of different possible futures rather than just a singular capital F future. And so, some of the origins were in this work were in the methods with the U.S. military around scenario planning, but it's really totally grown beyond that to a truly interdisciplinary field. And there is an academic side. There's a whole sort of field of academic research, different ways of constructing the future, use of methods and tools. A lot of them based on using trends and analysis of what's happening in the world and how things might play out. There's also an applied side. So organizations are increasingly using futures thinking, especially now around navigating change.
Okay.
So Nicole.
Okay, so Sean, I can't see your screen, so I'm going to wing it. I hope I'm on the right track, but keep me posted.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing now is the future's cone of possibilities. And this is a way to think about the future, different ways to think about the future. So we often imagine the future as a linear continuation of the present. This is fraught with problems. Think about climate change, for example, something we must address, not further contribute to. This current pandemic situation, too, has proven that the present can change quite rapidly, and what we expect can be significantly challenged. A continuation of this present is quite undesirable. So notice, too, the range of possible futures moves between utopian to dystopian and everything in between. Notice also the middle of the cone is the preferred future. This intersects the probable futures and the plausible futures. So it's important to note that we should, of course, strive to create preferable futures for ourselves when imagining and designing for them. Like saving for retirement, we can set a future goal and build towards it. Consider, though, that the world is made up of different people, different cultures, different economies, and different opportunities. And this is why we use the term futures, multiple. Your future is different from someone else's, and each vision of the future can change as time moves forward. So we can and we should strive to create the futures that we want. It takes imagination and planning. We want to look for seeds of change in the present and imagine them growing into something more significant.
Yeah, and this is really important right now. I mean, all of us are at some level engaged in conversations around what kind of future we want, what others want. And I mean, sometimes these take the tone of dystopias in the extreme or utopias, but usually somewhere in the middle. And so this idea around, our view of the future is really important to think about in terms of beginning with always, what are our expectations about what the future might be like, especially entering into a conversation with others. And to help us sort of enter into that is we're going to do a little game, reflective game with each other that was developed by Peter Hayward out of Australia, as well as Stuart Candy, who's now at Carnegie Mellon. It's called the Paulette Game. And so this game is getting us thinking about, where do we stand, right? How do we think about, the future, and really what are some of the attitudes in our personal, organizational, or cultural context that sort of shapes how we view the future. So here's how the game's going to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to, cast your imagination 25 years out from today, right? So 2045, right? Wow. And so the question is, part A, do you think that the world as a whole, right, just as a whole, will be better than the one we live in now? And I mean, better as really defined by you, or do you imagine it being worse, right? So that's part A. So, and as you think about, a better or a worse future, the part B is to think about your agency, right? So, what is your capacity to influence change at a bigger picture, right? And so, do you think that you have an ability to influence change, or are you doubtful or skeptical? And so these questions are totally subjective. And what we've got here are 4 quadrants that name each of those, one domain being better or positive future or worse, and the other being about, do you have any sort of feel like a sense of agency or a sense of skepticism or a lack of agency? And so what we ask Sarah to do is she's going to put up a Zoom poll. This is anonymous. And so what you're going to be able to do is you're actually going to click from one of these 4 options. So you're going to pick one of these 4 quadrants. So you should see these options pop up to you on your screen. So Sarah, if you could give us that poll. Can you share the results in the chat there?
Yeah, things are getting worse.
So I can read them out. It's things are good and getting better. We can't do anything, but why worry? That was 10%. Things are good and getting better, and we can act to make things even better was 35%. Nobody said things are getting worse. There's nothing we can do about it, which is nice. And the last option, things are getting worse, but we can act to make things better, was 55%. So the overwhelming majority chose the last option.
Okay, the last option, if you can repeat it again.
Things are getting worse, but we can act to make things better. 55%.
Okay, interesting. I mean, we get a different sort of every time we play this game, we get a different result. So, I mean, there's a question there. If that's one of the quadrants, I mean, one of the questions is, and maybe you can, if you folks feel you want to sort of type in the results, are there perspectives that are missing, right? That we know there were some quadrants that didn't get much stuff around. What was it? What had the lowest, Sarah?
0% for things are getting worse. There's nothing we can do about it.
Okay.
So we're going to get you into the mindset to begin to thinking about the future. So there's 3 things that will get you there. So deeply knowing the past and the present. American writer Kurt Vonnegut said, history is merely a list of surprises. It can only prepare us to be surprised yet again. So strong knowledge and appreciation of history is a necessary starting point. Understanding the present as well ties into knowing the past. What problems and possibilities exist here? This is the very tip or the beginning of the futures cone. So by now, you're again probably wondering why we keep saying futures instead of future. Every person, again, subject, every discipline, every community has different needs and issues. So different futures should always emerge. We're not all the same. Knowing this information can help forecast aspects of the future. What do we carry forward from the present? What challenges and possibilities might the future hold that we can see today? We ask for an openness and curiosity about possibilities and perspectives. So experiencing and envisioning alternative futures requires openness, curiosity. In the art of seeing, for anyone that knows the art of seeing, you know that when we look at visual art, there are no wrong answers. So this is the same. Don't get stuck in one idea or one vision of the future. Use your imagination, but build on evidence found in history, the present, emerging issues, challenges, and opportunities the future might bring. Remember to keep an open mind to the spectrum of utopian and dystopian futures and everything in between. We want to act and create in order to sense the emerging future. So envisioning futures is where it's made real. We want to see stories and scenarios come to life. It's very, very important to us. We're going to look at some examples of what artists see in the future and build towards creating your own vision of the future with a game called The Thing from the Future. So to get you there, let's start by getting you all in the mindset of futures thinking. And we're going to frame this now through the current COVID-19 pandemic situation that we're in right now. Okay, so this is a newspaper headline from April of 1919, and it could be read the same today. And I wonder if we still read newspapers if we would. So hockey fans, I don't know about you, but we're in the midst of what should be the most wonderful time of the year, playoff season. Last year, I used my Foresight skills to anticipate the Blues winning the Stanley Cup, and I was eager to do this again. So a good playoff speculation requires truly magical thinking, but also evidence of trends and not just reliance on emotions. I'm very sorry to say this, the fans. So 100 years ago, Canada was in the midst of a flu pandemic. It's estimated that about 500 million people worldwide became infected with this virus. Since we know that history and we know the outcome of that pandemic, this has helped Canada now to imagine, anticipate, and act now during this pandemic.
So if we fast forward 100 years, I mean, most of you folks are, I'd say all of you are probably familiar with these kinds of images. This is from the Public Health Agency of Canada, looking at, I mean, scenarios depending on different public health measures. And I mean, coming up with this stuff isn't, obviously out of the imagination. I mean, it's based off of a high degree of modeling based off of evidence that we've been able to really accrue from having, it's been 100 years since that pandemic, but we've had studies from all over the world on how do diseases spread. And so as we think about understanding the future, there's a huge part around using evidence, around using tested models. And so this is sort of now this is an image that's really in part of the public imagination at this point, and has been really sort of helping us think about, I mean, what are some of the possible futures. And coming back to this futures cone, I mean, we might sort of say that work like this really gets us to think about, I mean, what kinds of probable futures might we have, and what are some of the preferred ones? And the flattening curve, I mean, this is definitely within that conversation. So this work is really important in helping us, modeling scenarios about our possible futures. And there's also another piece around these other bands around the plausible and the possible, right? Which might not necessarily be probable or even preferable, but in terms of keeping our mind open about possibilities, we need futures work that helps us do work on the edges. And I'll just give you some examples. I mean, most of you here, all of you here know about the iPhone. I mean, if you, like me, you grew up, we didn't have smartphones. And I mean, we got to understand that the future is somehow always going to be different than today. Even though it seems kind of mundane right now that we've all got smartphones, it's we know it's a huge deal. And so the way in which things like technological innovations can totally change the future is really important. And I mean, right now with contact tracing and video calls with clinicians, I mean, this has been huge. And I remember back to my earlier TV watching days, and I mean, some of the first seeds of this were in Star Trek. Like, we had those devices that they communicate, and I mean, it seemed outrageous, but I mean, here we are, right? That this stuff is real now. So I mean, knowing that the future is going to be different, and sometimes things that we don't expect to do change it. So another story around unexpected innovations is Blue Dot. So if any of you are aware of Blue Dot, they're a small Canadian company that they've created an algorithm that scours the world for outbreaks of infectious diseases, essentially a digital early warning system. And it was among the first to raise alarms about COVID. And it did it by relying on AI to gather data, not official statements, but things like medical bulletins, ticket data from 400,000 airports, even livestock reports to predict where the virus would go next. And so this is an image of Dr. Cameron Kahn, who's the CEO of Blue Dot, sort of showing their dashboard. And really it's a sort of a bit of a visual story around, the way they talked about it was, if you think of an outbreak a bit like a fire and the embers flying off, I mean, these are the embers that are flying off in different directions. And so, part of this was Blue Dot. They licensed access, believe it or not, to anonymize location data from millions of cell phones, which has obviously huge privacy implications. But I mean, they used that to identify 12 of the 20 cities that would really suffer from the pandemic first. And so, I mean, we're now at the emergence of the use of AI in real time to really be able to track something we've never been able to do before. And this has really big implications on healthcare futures. Now, I mean, another piece is really, let's look at another narrative emerging during this pandemic. This image says quite a lot. And it represents a significantly different image and point of view. Remember coming back to that expectations game that we had about what are people's view of the future, right? Is it going to be better or worse? What are people's sort of sense of agency and response? And so, we now with these images are starting to capture some of the utopian and dystopian scenarios for different segments of the population. And we need to really sort of in this work really consider what futures look like from different perspectives. So let's return back to this image. And I mean, when I first saw this image, I mean, nobody in my family has any experience with pandemics, either here or abroad. I mean, there are people in our community who have experience with SARS, but I mean, as a whole, as a global community, it goes back to sort of have memories of what was it like, right? And so seeing these scenarios early on, I had no idea what this would start to look like. It was really hard for me to imagine what was coming forward. And then I started to see things in the media. And this is recent. I think this was in April from Frank Gunn. This is the Gardner Expressway at rush hour. And I mean, I've done this commute so many times and I know what it's like. This blew me away. I mean, I had a real reaction to this, and you may have as well if you know this stretch of road. I mean, I had this kind of like, wow, this is kind of this is a little bit dystopian. But then there's other things that start to come up with this image that get us thinking about how do we work, how do goods move, the environment, right? Pollution. So actually having these images, this image, really starts to help sort of imagine what does a scenario actually start to look and feel like? I mean, if we dig a little bit deeper into some of the images that are emerging, here's a makeshift morgue in NYC. When we think about the spike, right, and what that might mean, what that might look like, I mean, it's a pretty sort of grim and disturbing image to sort of begin to think about. This is what is actually happening that we don't maybe sort of see or recognize in just looking at some of those graphs. And the reason why we're sort of talking about the images as part of futures work is that we need to sort of think about, this thing that we call experiential futures is how do the sort of the situations and the stuff, the images, the actual concrete things, we consider from the future, how could those be utilize those to catalyze, insight, conversation, and change? So we're going to spend a little bit of a time playing a game around experiential futures as a way of thinking about how we might think about future possibilities in healthcare. And to do that, we're going to have Nicole share her work with the arts.
So this is a great quote. I've used this term imagine and imagination a lot and will continue to do so. But we cannot achieve what we cannot imagine. So please keep that in mind. So now we have writers, directors, actors, and artists that bring the futures to life. We will stray a little bit from our central theme of the current pandemic and look at how the arts help us to imagine futures. So this first slide, we all have our favorite films and television shows about the future, I'm sure. So this is a smattering of things that Sean and I put together. And since film and television are very, very popular media to everybody, we're not going to talk about any of these, but they're all excellent resources. So have a look if you have a chance. Maybe put in the chat some of your favorite future things, future scenario, film and television. So futurist and science fiction writer Leah Zaidi, who's also a colleague and friend of mine, has created job ads from the future. So have a look at these. We understand the purpose of job ads, but disrupting the familiar is a great way to create an experiential future. So we recognize this, but then we look at it again and say, what? But definitely something to think about, healthcare providers. Maybe someday you'll be a reality rehabilitator. Okay, these next two slides, this is a great work. These are still images from Anishinaabe artist Lisa Jackson's 2018 virtual reality work called Bidabon, First Light. So this artwork is rooted in Indigenous futurism. Bidabon asks users to think about their place in history and their role in this possible future, Toronto reclaimed by nature. So these images are fantastic. So imagine returning to the place originally known as Toronto, engaging with Wendat, Mohawk, and Anishinaabe peoples. Just imagine. And this image is actually just a personal photograph that I took. So this is at the Contemporary Art Gallery in Ghent in Belgium. This is a gallery space, which is a normal gallery space, recognizable as such. It's a permanent art gallery installation featuring very famous modern and contemporary European artists. This was in 2017. So the curator has disrupted this entire exhibition space, not just a work of art, but the entire space. And he's disrupted it with very, very unexpected things. And when you walk into the space, it's like, what is going on here? So you see mattresses and luggage, personal effects of refugees and transient people. So consider and imagine when public spaces like art galleries might be used to house migrants and refugees in a time of climate crisis and or maybe war. And as we look at this slide now, consider that this has actually become kind of real. Public spaces like community hockey arenas have become testing centers, makeshift hospitals, and shelters. So this last work is by futurist Stuart Candy and Jake Dunnigan, artist Sarah Kornfeld, and oceanographer Wallace Nichols. This is called Plastic Century. It's kind of hard to see, but we see like the 4 different images of the past and the future. So this is a visualization of the plastic pollution in the oceans. It captures the history present, and plausible future of the problem of plastic in oceans using water coolers as a vessel. So we all drink from water coolers. So here's the emotional catch to grab your attention. So in 1910, there was one little piece of plastic. In 1960, there was a little bit more. In 2010, which is when this work was done, it was swimming in plastic. And in 2030, this is the expectation. It was almost opaque with plastics. That's what we can expect. Okay, Sean.
All right. So we've, did some storytelling and sort of showing of how this work is grounded. And so what we want to do is we actually want to get creative here. And we're going to play a game together. So we're going to play a game with you called The Think from the Future, which was developed by a futures think tank called the Situation Lab. Stuart Candy, who we mentioned, is a big part of that. And the object of the game is to use, there's a deck of cards with 4 different kinds of, 4 sets to put them together to generate, interesting, sometimes funny, sometimes thought-provoking ideas for artifacts from the future. And so there are 4 parts to this, these cards that we're going to engage with you. And the first is that the green card is really about sort of a timeline or an arc. And so, we might be talking about a future 10 years from now. We might be talking about a future, 1,000 years from now. And we're going to sort of show you one that you're going to use. The next is around, you could talk about futures in any kind of terrain. So it could be law, health, education, security, entertainment, so on. The other set of cards are really a sort of a set of objects, common things like ads, postcards, toys, things like that. And the last is really about the emotional tone of the future. And you can kind of draw from any range of those. And those kind of get put together to help you sort of then think about how do you create a possible future based off of the cards that you get. And so before we get you to play the game, we're going to do sort of Nicole and I sort of a short demo on how you kind of might do this. So let's say you drew this set of cards here. And we're asking in this set here to be thinking about 20 years from now. And we're going to use this term discipline. We're going to give you guys this one. A disciplined future is, imagine society, government has imposed a certain set of restrictions or values, right, on society. The terrain is education. The mood, we loved when we draw this one, weirdness. And the last was a job ad. So we had some fun sort of thinking about this one, and kind of where we went with it was, okay, all right, so we got 2040. Society has decided there's some fundamental values. The pandemic rages on, and maybe populist governments have shut down universities or made it really hard to get in. Maybe there are no in-person classes. And now here's the weird part is we've decided, or really the only place now for original thinking and science is on Mars. Yeah, it's humans have now colonized Mars, 2030. Initially it was just, for scientists, but now it's like this is a place for intelligentsia to go. Who have work, who want to do creative work, who want to get there. And so people are using their severance packages to get to Mars. So here we are, Mars. We've got maybe a university, and we need some faculty, right? So one of the things that we thought kind of funny is that Mars has no historical knowledge, right? So maybe we need an historian who's going to come to Mars and help us sort of think about our past to help us with our future. So we have a job ad. We're looking for qualified candidates in history who have maybe some stuff around communications theory and internet. If you could mail us a CV through interplanetary mail, that would be amazing. Okay. So we're a little outrageous here, but we sort of started to just think about, how would you sort of put these things together in a way that might be kind of interesting to think about? Now, we're going to kind of tone it down a little bit for you folks, and we're going to put you into a breakout room. And what we're going to do is we are going to give you these cards here. So imagine 10 years from now that society, government has imposed some kind of restrictions. And the domain here is clinical practice. Could be your own, could be somewhere else. And the feeling of the time, of the moment, is apathy. And the thing that you're beginning to think about is, what would a testing kit 10 years from now in this kind of situation, this kind of feeling, what might kind of testing kits would there be, right? How might it be being used by you or others? And I mean, or maybe there's some situations that express this mood, perhaps are already seeing the seeds of this now, right, coming in. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna put you into a breakout room with some of your colleagues, and we're gonna give you 10 minutes, and all we're asking you to do is to talk and collectively brainstorm and construct some ideas. And so we encourage you to say yes to whatever comes up and build on it. So say, the phrase we use is say yes and we're gonna ask you at the end of the 10 minutes to come back, and we're gonna try to get a couple folks to share what they've got, okay? So we're gonna put you into a random breakout room with 3 or 4. And then we're also gonna, in the chat, we're gonna share with you just what these 4 things that we've given you here, okay? So that's your task, and we're gonna send you into breakout rooms now. Okay, so Sarah, are you ready?
Yes.
Sarah, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I believe everyone should have been sorted now.
So we're just curious, we'd love to hear from 1 or 2 teams briefly on what did you come up with as part of your brainstorm?
Hey, Sean.
Hi. Yeah, hey, Mike.
The group elected me to be the presenter. We envisioned a test for HIV in a society where we didn't really trust everybody to keep hold of their information or be willing to undergo this procedure of always having their HIV status on them. So we came up with a microchip that would be inserted into people's bodies that carries their status, and it's made of plastic. And it's only going to be good for about 2 years. When it's no longer anymore good, it's going to end up in the ocean.
Wow. Okay, so we've got
quite dystopian. Yeah.
Yeah, a little dystopian, yeah. But I mean, somebody's benefiting from that. Maybe it's Mike.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. And the other thing about this was that you needed to have the chip and you needed to know your status just to log on to your phone and your computers at work.
Oh, man.
Ouch.
That sounds tough. Okay, Mike, we'll come back to you for looking for more ideas, you and your team. That's great. Anybody else? Anybody else got one they want to share?
Yes, I can go.
Great.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So can I share 2? Just because it seems like it was really interesting how we had 2 different artifacts based off of our backgrounds.
Go for it.
Yeah. So I worked with Alina, whose background is in psych, and one of the first things that we thought about was a very concrete understanding of the term apathy and how we could apply it to clinical practice. So she thought about a testing kit that she would use in her clinical practice 10 years from now, where she would be able to measure a patient's level of apathy and level of motivation in order to determine whether they were actually ripe for a clinical treatment. And based off of that, a motivation level or apathy level, they could determine, whether this patient had any good chance of success. And as an emergency medicine resident, I thought about, in 10 years from now, we might be able to get a testing kit that was so accurate in determining mortality that people would kind of be apathetic to the results. So let's say, anyone comes into the emergency department, they get swabbed, and this testing kit says you have 37 days left to live. And in the emergency department, we're so used to it that we're like, oh, we don't really treat people less than 45 days left to live. And so, sorry. Yeah. So very different based on our background, but
that's
yeah.
Amazing. Wow. Okay. So 45 days left to live. That might be the new benchmark as well. Thanks, Alvin. So, I mean, we don't have a lot of time left, but we just wanted to introduce to you guys this ability to sort of play in concrete ways what the future might be like. And that we actually need some ways to help us sort of ground our conversation in the things and the feelings that are a part of the future. And then we also need some constraints to force us to think about different possibilities. So that's sort of one thing we wanted to introduce you folks to today. And I mean, as a reflection on what we did today, we actually covered a ton of ground in terms of foresight and futures methods around expectations, working across disciplines, using our imagination, and this sort of dance between the abstract and concrete, and really this work of like scenario building and world making, which is really a natural part of our story telling abilities, but we don't really sort of exercise it maybe as much in healthcare as we can. So what we wanted to ask you folks is maybe just sort of type your answers to this question in the chat. If there was a method or a mindset or something from this workshop that you could use tomorrow, or today if you want, I mean, there's still time left today, but I mean, what would that be, right? So maybe just sort of popping in the chat there, what do you think that might be? We really love to hear what you folks thought about this year.
Nice.
Okay, looking across disciplines. Okay, scenario building, great.
Good.
Okay. So as people fill that in, I'll also mention, thanks, Down the Arts, is another, as part of the Health Leadership Academy, you may be interested, and we'll put this in the resources, is the Health Leadership Academy did a white paper last year, a big research project on alternative futures of health. A little less experiential in terms of what we did today, but I mean, you might find interesting. Sarah, I mean, or sorry, Nicole, what do we have to share with them?
Well, there's lots of resources if you're interested in this wackiness we call the future. There's just a couple we put here. If the Journal of Future Studies is amazing, it's free. There seems to be a general consensus that anything about the future, any learning, teaching, and sharing ideas is generally free. So it's very open source. So the Journal of Future Studies is amazing. Sean was part of this white paper preparing for the alternative futures of health. Everyone can play the thing from the future. You can download it for free and make your own cards, or you can order proper cards if you want. But if you're looking for something to do with the family tonight, maybe the thing from the future is that. It should be fun. And then Stuart Candy, of course, I had the opportunity to learn from Stuart, which is amazing. He's a great blog. And then my friend and colleague Leah Zaidi and her company Multiverse Design, she's a science fiction writer as well, but she puts out amazing work, which is really, really worth seeing. If you want like a really, really basic teaching the future and some handy activities for your colleagues or even for kids, check out Teach the Future.
Great, so that kind of wraps us up. We've got a Google form that we'd love for you to fill out. I know Sarah's got a different evaluation for you guys, but we'd love to hear your feedback on this workshop. This is our first go. And there's all of our references. And thank you so much for joining. This has been really fun.
Yeah. Do we hang up now? Bye, everyone.
Yeah, this is kind of the weird, awkward space at the end. Thing. Like,
Thanks so much, Sean. Thanks so much, Nicole. That was really informative, and it sounds like everyone really enjoyed it. So
awesome.
Thank you.
Great.